It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland. It's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.
Monster Talk.
Welcome to Monster Talk Live, the streaming show that sometimes works. We're back again, I hope. I'm Blake Smith.
I'm Karen Stolzno, and our guest this evening, or for her it's morning, is Lynne Kelly. Welcome to the show, Lynne.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, Blake.
Hello, I can hear myself, so I know it's working this time.
So, Lynne, we had you on the show a number of years ago, and you were talking about spiders, and you've written about an enormous array of topics, from spiders to crocodiles and skepticism. And over the past decade or so, you've become interested in another topic, and that's about memory techniques. So can you start by telling us a little bit about how you got interested in this topic?
Yes, I'd just written the book on spiders and crocodiles, and to get crocodiles interesting, because I had to introduce 23 different species, I'd used the indigenous stories going around the world. I thought in my ignorance that they were cutesy little stories about the animals and that would add a bit of colour. I discovered they weren't. I had a contract to write another book on animal behaviour using the indigenous stories to look at the animal behaviour and would I see more as a non-indigenous person, which of course I did. Publisher interested, PhD scholarship at La Trobe University, everything going wonderfully well. And then I derailed the entire thing because my natural memory is incredibly poor. You couldn't believe how bad it is. And I realized they were memorizing vast amounts of information because they weren't writing it down, and their survival physically and culturally depended entirely on memory. And my PhD topic became, how the hell are they doing it?
That's amazing. Isn't it funny how things sort of capture your mind and you just want to dig in and dig in and dig in? I wish we had some way to pick what we would become obsessed with. That'd be really great. Because I'd probably pick something that made me more money. But here we are with monsters.
All of us. All of us.
No, I'm happy with, as long as I'm obsessed, I'm happy.
No, I know. It's completely, I totally the same way. It intense curiosity. I just love to keep digging. And I find that when I'm working on writing a research project, the hard part is to stop researching and actually write down stuff. It's like, I want to find more, and then I talk to people and I forget they don't know all the stuff I do, It's
And that's with writing science books, and my new one in November is my 19th. Writing science, you need to limit the scope and not info dump everything, especially when it's popular science.
Yes.
And I'll get to the different memory books. But can I just give you one example of how extraordinary these memory systems are?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure.
The Navajo, these research things are hard to get because you need scientists, a number of elders, and permission for the research to be released. And a pair of Navajo experts talked about 701 invertebrates. That's just insects and spiders. And they had recalled
in this video also you
from memory, classified habitats, behavior, 10 of which were pests like gnats and fleas, and that one which they ate, the cicada. All the rest were knowledge for knowledge's sake and metaphor. And people do not think about the intellectual knowledge bank of Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. And that just blew my mind, and I had to work out how they're doing it.
No doubt. I mean, I imagine most people can't name 70 insects around their house, let alone 700.
Seven.
Or 7. Everything's a bug. And spiders.
Bugs, yeah. Yep.
So it's interesting because this idea of encoding information with these sort of what do you call them? I've heard people call them mind palaces or that sort of thing. What do you like to call them?
That's the basis of the whole thing, is memory palaces.
Okay.
But I've now got something.
Well, what?
It's not coronavirus.
No.
But the thing is, if you look into the research on memory palaces, you'll find it started with the Greeks. A lot of research, everything started with the Greeks, that they had these memory palaces. I'll explain what it is first and then explain why it sure didn't start with the Greeks.
If you want to clear your throat, I was just going to say I will. This is going to feed right into that, because when I think about the Greeks, one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is how writing, I'm going to say, obviated the need for necessarily using these kind of techniques for some people. I mean, and I know that there's a famous story about Socrates railing against the idea of writing. And I love that story because he thought it was going to weaken people's mind. And I think now you're getting the same kind of narrative around Google's ruining people's minds. You don't need to memorize things anymore.
Yeah.
And so,
and I'm with Socrates now that I've done these methods.
Yeah.
I'm actually with Socrates. Look, we'll get into all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
It's a big topic. It has obsessed me.
Yeah.
It did gain me a PhD in academic book as well as 2 trade books. So
outstanding. Time well spent. Right.
I've been well reviewed and checked and double checked. Okay, so memory palace is basically you take an area, a physical space, and at each location you encode information. I'm at the kitchen table, which one memory palace I've got running around here is every country in the world in chronological order. So not chronological order, sorry, population order.
Population, yeah.
Okay.
So I start with China, India. Now I'm pointing up to where they are, China, India, and so
on. For our podcast listeners, she's pointing up to the left.
Yes. So I'm not good on left and right. So I'm sitting at the kitchen table, which by coincidence is Hungary, which I thought was very good.
That's good. That's good.
Nice.
Falkland Islands over there. I'm now pointing to my right, and so on. And by having a location fixed in your mind associated with that country, you then build layer upon layer upon layer of information. So it's not rote learning. You probably in some ways rote learn the foundation, and then you layer on top of it. So you ground the foundation in a physical structure that doesn't move. So the Greek orators would use the streetscape or a big building, and they would memorize their speeches. So Homer, and that was believed in 800 BC, believed to have done this, but we know from the writings that all the ancient Greeks did it. And as they were giving their speech, they would mentally walk around the building and pull it all back. And that's all very cool, except that it wasn't invented by the Greeks. That is a simplified version of what every Indigenous culture does. So I'll probably talk mostly about Australian Aboriginal because we have a 65,000-year continuous tradition. That's continuous tradition, not just biological. And there's scientific evidence going back, which I'll get to. Yeah, I'm going to go on forever. But all
that's okay.
We'll now be going through the entire,
Aboriginals call them song lines, and they're through the landscape. Native American people call them pilgrimage trails or pilgrimage paths. So I found them with every Indigenous culture. So everything I talk about now is something that I could show was used by all Indigenous cultures that I researched, and I researched a lot of them. I'm not taking a given culture and shifting it to Stonehenge because that would be ludicrous. And Stonehenge is only 5,000 years old. It's a mere baby.
So this is found universally then, these memory techniques.
Absolutely.
And do you have any idea of how they spread? Did they just diffuse from one society to another, or was it any?
Absolutely not. There's no way our Aboriginal people were chatting to Native Americans or anything else. No, it's all based on the neuroscience of the human brain. Our brains all function the same way. And so when you think of something at a physical location and think of them together, it's called a temporal snapshot. Your brain associates them. and it's the 2014 Nobel Prize for Medicine, actually went to researchers who were showing how this works in the brain with things called grid cells, and we can get all terribly technical. But it is the human brain and the hippocampus, and right down deep, the last memories that go are associated with place and with music. They are the two strongest memory devices, which is why you'll see with dementia, even people with advanced dementia, if you play music that's familiar, they'll respond to it or go to a place. Right. All Indigenous cultures sing all their knowledge and associate it with place. It's only the last few hundred years that we've stopped. The Greeks still use place. I don't think they sung it as much. Those methods of memory palaces were taught right through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance in all schools. We have one of the textbooks, the Ad Horennium. So it's only the last few hundred years we've stopped doing this. And now that I'm doing it, it's phenomenal.
Is this something that's completely lost, or it's something that certain groups are still maintaining today?
Certain groups certainly are. Memory champions, memory competitors, all use memory palaces. So I decided in memory code, so the books go in order, knowledge and power, and that's my PhD, and it's Cambridge
That's
University.
the academic one.
It's ridiculously expensive and got brackets and names in every line. Yeah, don't even bother with it. Unless
know what that's like.
And there's 800 item bibliography, but that's on my website anyway. Then came the memory code. That's the American edition of the memory code, which takes this and applies it to archaeology. And then the response to that was hugely, but how can we use this now? What's the implications for education for everybody right now? And that's Memorycraft. I don't have the American edition of that yet. I haven't got a copy. It's only just come out in America a few months ago. So at the end of memory code, it's getting back to the competitors. I'd mentioned the memory competitors and said there is no way I could do this. I couldn't cope with the stress, but that didn't stop me. So I then entered the Australian memory competition. Now, remember, this is somebody who at school could not do languages, couldn't do anything. Maths and physics were the only subjects I was good at because I could get away with not remembering anything. And so I started using the techniques and entering the competitions. And I'm Australia's senior memory champion for 2 years in a row, the last two competitions.
Congratulations. Wow.
And that's memorizing shuffled decks of cards and strings of binary, useless stuff. But you use the memory techniques exactly for that. But it's more than just associating with landscape places. But that's the heart of it all.
And aren't some of these techniques used by magicians too? I seem to have heard, I think maybe Ian Rowland and Banachek, I think they've referred to using these kinds of techniques.
They use memory palaces. And so if you go back to the Greeks, the way the Greeks taught it, that's used by magicians and memory competitors and everything. What my research showed, which is essential for the archaeology, is that the Indigenous cultures don't limit to just using the landscape. They build up with story, which is what all memory competitors do. They give character to every card or every number and then make images with stories. But Indigenous cultures add a whole lot of other elements to it. And these, if you're going to analyse a landscape like Stonehenge, you need to look at all these elements, which is why if they put roads through and destroy the landscape before they've checked all this stuff, there's a bit of a worry. So let's take the device that's attracted the most attention. I'll start with the Australian version.
Okay.
So this is a Coolamon. It's a food holding device.
So for we'll put this out as a part of our podcast as well. So this is a sort of it looks almost like an animal shell, but I assume it's carved from wood.
Carved from wood, yes.
Yeah, and then it's got shapes on the outside and the inside smooth, and it's sort of
hollowed out.
Like a bowl,
it's like an open-ended bowl or a very broken canoe. Yeah.
But on the back are a whole lot of, and we could. I can give you a set of images that you can put up on the website.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Great.
I guess it also looks a little bit like a shield if you hold it that
Yes.
way. Yeah.
Which is very observant of you, because the same patterns appear on shields and all sorts of other objects. And it's because they whack their memory stuff everywhere. So that is a memory device.
Beautiful.
Every one of those. So this is a real one from a couple of 100 years ago that I was given custodianship of. You can't own these devices. We can get into the cultures a lot. But a young girl and right through her life would learn the songs associated with each, and that would act as a memory device. So it's a miniature memory palace. So I found these all over the world. One thing I read about was that the Luba people of West Africa, mostly the Congo, were using a device that looks like this. There's none in Australia. I finally saw them in America and held one. And that they were encoding an entire encyclopedia to a bit of wood with shells. So this is, do you want to describe it, Blake?
Sure. It is a somewhat hourglass-shaped flat piece of material with shells and beads affixed to it. And it has in the middle a set of raised ridges. And
it doesn't matter what they have carvings. They're all different.
But yeah, there's colored beads, shells, and they're in a sort of a inch. Well, they're very pretty, but I imagine they mean something. So sorry. And my wife has remembered something. My next drink. Okay.
And the back also has patterning.
I see. Mm-hmm.
You can't do it right now. Yeah.
So I, as a foundation member of the Australian Skeptics, read the research and said, crap, frankly, I cannot believe that you could encode masses amount. Now, in my very thorough and scientific technique, I went and grabbed a bit of wood because they were building our veranda at the time. So that's what I veranda. Randomly shoved on some beads and shells and decided to encode the birds of Victoria, the 412 of them, birds in their 80 families, and started encoding. And I've got upside down. And it works a treat. Wow. I can now reel off. How long have we got? I could reel off the whole 400 in taxonomic order. And then once you've got them, you can then start adding more and more and more detail. I'm adding the songs at the moment, all sorts of things. I could not believe that worked. I have had so many people write to me and who have implemented it, from kids as young as 2 or 3.
So you used a piece of wood to remember something, and you literally memorized it by getting bored.
Don't mind him. So this is...
Yes, you start. So the emus there, our big one, the shell fell off and left, because I'm really bad at craft as well, and left just a pointy bit, which I left because touching that reminds me of the emu. They're a nasty. Yeah, exactly.
Nappy things.
So that was easy. I'm going to do the whole lot, you see.
No, that's fine. I'm trying to think of Americans would be like, what kind of bird? What?
They say
like
emu.
Oh, it's that like okay? I know emus.
Emu. Yes.
Yeah.
Emu.
My grandfather had an emu. Yeah. So.
The next one has 16 ducks associated.
Wow.
So that's a story. There's the swans and the magpies and things, which are the names of our football teams. So I put together a story of a football match that got completely out of control. The hardhead started bashing everyone. The shoveler started burying the dead. The musk duck was off having sex in the bushes. And that story gives me the name of all 16 species in taxonomic orders. So the 2 tea ladies, the grey tail and the chestnut tail, they'll be together because they're the same genus. And I did that for the whole 400 plus. No. And it works.
Do you have to refresh it? Like, I mean, how often do you have to go back to it to make it stick? That's a
very important point. Because, yes, if you don't refresh it, you'll lose it. And Indigenous cultures are not static. They will add and change to things. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have a ceremonial cycle. So they make sure that every song is sung at some time during the year, or there's one cycle in New Guinea that's every 5 years. Once it's in, it's amazing how hard it sticks. I don't refresh it often because we go out birding and I'm using it. I don't take it with me. It's in my head. I can reproduce that. This house burns down. I grab my husband, obviously, and it is so, my emotional involvement with it is amazing. And that is part of memory. By becoming emotionally involved with the devices, you actually memorize more. So you'll see Indigenous people are very emotional about their stories and songs.
Well, so one of the things I find interesting about this is clearly the technique works, but how do you go about saying for some lost population, like you mentioned Stonehenge, and I'm thinking about other historical sites that we don't actually have records from the people, we just have the remnants of their civilizations. How do you infer and deduce that they were memory devices? And can you say anything about what they were encoding?
Yes, I can't say exactly what they're encoding, and anyone interpreting their beliefs is really getting very speculative, because even within our 300 Aboriginal cultures and over 700 dialects, the beliefs vary massively. The techniques they're using don't, but the genres of information recalled are consistent everywhere. There is religion. I left that aside because I haven't got any secure comparison, but in turn, and science, my background, animal behavior and animals, of which there'll usually be hundreds, if not thousands. Plants, and now in a given environment, you're now up to the thousands as well, because it's often very indistinct little plants that'll be useful. Astronomy, not astrology, astronomy, and it's not hoo-ha to the sun gods. Indigenous cultures on the whole do not worship gods. They have characters, and they'll use the same terms all over the world whose stories they tell. And they will adapt those stories. They know perfectly well their memory devices. So as to the degree of belief in the reality of them, that varies between individuals, as it does within our group. But those stories encode, and the astronomy is essential for maintaining a calendar. Whether you're an agricultural, and this becomes important because all the monuments I talk about are in the transition, whether you're an agricultural culture, you must know the calendar in advance. You can't say, oh, the wheat's ripened. Oh, I should have planted it 6 months ago.
Right.
With our cultures, they are not nomadic. Our Aboriginal cultures, they are not nomadic. They are mobile. They move between known sites. Some down south here in very fertile areas are actually probably stationary and doing a form of gardening. Up north, they move between sites, but they know exactly where they're moving because they've memorized their routes and landscape. And we have, from the Yanyuwa people up north, 800 kilometres of navigation stored in memory.
Wow.
And that's recent research. 800 kilometres they can navigate through bush with what we would call no signposts, obviously, for them. So, and I've lost track of the question now.
I was just asking about how would you infer from ancient stuff.
So
things.
What you're looking at ancient monuments, there's 10 indicators that I used in the book. And can I remember them? Anyway, let's do the main ones. Firstly, a monument should be a place that is not inhabited. So it shouldn't have lots of hearths and things. So at Stonehenge, there's no sign of habitation there because it's a knowledge site. It's a ceremonial site. And ceremony is the way that the information is recalled regularly. It's sung and danced regularly. So there should be performance sites. Those performance sites must have public areas and restricted areas. And I can go into the whole transition at Stonehenge went from public to restricted, and then you get Durrington walls, and you've got to look at the whole landscape and the chronology. But the reason they have restricted sites is absolutely critical. There's a thing called, I'm told that the Chinese Whispers isn't called Chinese Whispers in America, and it's
telephone game or
whatever, that if you tell something to someone within a quarter of an hour, it's obscured, corrupted.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a much better name than Chinese Whispers. Anyway.
It's a bit racist now.
It does, but that's what it's called in Australia.
I haven't heard that term for 15 years.
Haven't you? Oh, right. Anyway, we have strong, robust scientific evidence of stories from Australia that date back 17,000 years. We expect they will go much more to the 65,000 we know, but at the moment, and those are stories of landscape changes at the end of the Ice Age, where habitats changed, where pieces of land became islands. The Yarra, which you will know, Karen, in Victoria, flowed to Tasmania, the little blob off the bottom of Australia. It did flow all the way, and the Aboriginal stories told the story of the direction of where it was, which was written down long before the scientists went under Port Phillip Bay and found the site. So we have from these stories clear evidence of accurate description of landscape changes, and the landscape is the memory palace, dating back, we know, 17,000 years. Remember, Stonehenge is only 5,000, dating back 17,000 years. And how do they stop the telephone game effect, the corruption, is that this information is kept restricted. So here it's called secret business. In all Indigenous cultures, there's restricted information. So you get taught the song lines, you get, or the pilgrimage child, you get taught the foundation, and then over time with initiation, you get led into more and more secrets. And you only get led into the next bit when you've got that really accurate. And at the top, in the secret ceremonies, they're checking each other the whole time to keep it accurate. And that's going back, that's how it's maintained really accurately. So you have, for the Pueblo people, their kiva, which are subterranean rooms, are kept, everything's kept really restricted there, and they've got all sorts of rules. I mostly researched Pueblo with America because they stayed on their own land. Everyone else was moved off, which is heartbreaking. And here we have Bora grounds, which are ceremonial sites. So if you look at Stonehenge, we'll get to the archaeology of that in a moment, but you must, so what I'm looking for in these sites, to get back to Blake's question, how long have we got to get? I'll go on forever.
We got time.
There must be public and restricted sites. So I found that at every one of the locations. There should be astronomical alignments, because it's absolutely essential that you keep a calendar to know when resources will be available, when to plant, and so on. So we've got that everywhere. We've got them here in Australia. They're everywhere in the world, either on the solstices or the equinoxes, and these devices. If I can't find, I should use a much more accurate ones. If I can't find these inscribed devices, then I've got a problem. If anyone can find a single stone circle, or, in the British Neolithic, you've got the stone circles, there's about 1,000 of them, not just Stonehenge. And there's stone arrangements and timber arrangements. If they're also right across America, they're also in South America, you've got them, Egypt, you've got them all over the world, across Asia, Europe. If anyone can find one of those where you can't sequence it, you can't find a distinct order to move around it, it won't work as a memory palace. And there aren't any so far that anyone's pointed out to. And yet there are thousands of sites like this that all have this perfect method in timber or in stone to set up as a memory palace. Acoustic enhancement is another one. I'm just going to open my book and see, because anything that's more acoustically memorable is also makes it more memorable. And the acoustic makes it more entertaining.
Yeah. So is that like places where like some of the Celtic burial grounds where they have it amplifies the voice when you speak from inside?
Exactly.
Okay.
They all have that. Now, the important thing for my area is that it's a stratified society, but no sign of individual wealth. And that's the key to these. So there's some sign that they were an elite because there have to be the elders that memorize it.
Mm-hmm.
But in all these cultures, knowledge is power. So there will not be, so there isn't at the beginning of Stonehenge, there is at the end because it's part of a transition. There won't be burials at the beginning with a lot of wealthy grave goods. Okay. Towards the end, as knowledge becomes less of a power, then you start to get signs of individual wealth and of warriors. So the ditches, which are really important, the cross-section, the ditches in the British Neolithic, change from being flat-bottomed, which is performance, designed for performance and acoustic enhancement and being able to cover in weather, because let's face it, the Brits have terrible weather, and to V-shaped defensive. So in Australian cultures, you have no individual wealth among individuals because it's still a sharing one. There's other odds and sods and art, the role of art, but I could go on forever. I'm looking for those 10, and if I don't get at least 8, preferably 9 or 10 of those indicators, then I reject the site as a knowledge site. Okay. Stonehenge cracks it for 9. It's rock art, which is the one that's 10th. It's got a little bit, but not much, so I don't give it a tick on that.
But you've found these points at various archaeological sites around the globe, like didn't you look at Easter Island as well, and a number of other sites?
Yes, Easter Island's a little bit different, but yes, Chaco Canyon in America, over in New Mexico, Poverty Point in Louisiana. When I was there, it's got big mounds. There's no standing stones because there's no stone bigger than grains of sand on the Mississippi, on that particular area in Louisiana. But when I was there, they started finding potholes that had held timbers. They had huge mounds, and mounds are also used as a memory location for performance. And by having poles in the mounds, you then create a memory palace. So we knew that. And I said to them when I was there, please turn those into a timber circle. And sure enough, the research showed that it was part of a timber circle about the same dimensions as Stonehenge, 100 meters or so across, about the same number of posts. They were not talking to each other. That's the most effective size for the human brain to take it in.
We're still using that today. And instead of wooden posts, we use internet posts.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Decorated posts, totem poles are the best, no, but decorated posts are used everywhere as a memory device for the story. They've now got 27 post circles at Poverty Point in Louisiana over the time that it was used there. Now, that's a hunter-gatherer site because the Mississippi is so strong, yet they were stationary. So they were using these techniques, and there's lots of devices there that worked as memory devices. So, yeah. So sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, this is Monster Talk, and when we were first talking about treating this topic, you said that there's a specific purpose for monsters in mythology as well that you found in your research.
Okay, so the term mythology, we can't use that term in terms of myths. It's not true. It's the term mythology are stories that include characters to make the information memorable. Right. The more vibrant the characters, the more memorable the story. Fairy tales are the result of it. There's lots of research showing that.
Right. No, this is actually a distinction we've talked about before, because the idea, like for national myths, the George Washington in America, we talk about him chopping down a cherry tree and never telling a lie. No, but he's become this mythic figure. A lot of our founding people have. Turns out they're much more complicated, real people, but that's not what sticks. And that's not what founds your national myths. And these myths are always ways of remembering important values, whether they're literally physically true or not.
And that's what indigenous stories are. So here they call them ancestors. Now, whether those ancestors are biological or mythological or a mesh of the two doesn't matter. It's the question that's wrong. Is it a biological ancestor or not? Exactly as your George Washington. I wish I'd known that news in the book.
The next book, there'll be another one.
So they use them in that way. And in New Zealand, the Maori, who have their tradition going back the 800 years they've been there, know all those ancestors back. And that was the thing with Easter Island. I do want to go into exactly with Stonehenge because it's a lovely example. But with Easter Island, my ticks didn't quite work. I was starting to have to mold it a bit. Nowhere else I'd had to do that, to rig it. And I'm not willing to do that, certainly not in academic research. And then it dawned on me, it was colonized by Pacific people. Now, the Pacific people, and the best example the example I'll work from here are the Maori of New Zealand. They use their hereditary trees as their foundation memory device and then the landscape. So whereas Aboriginal Native American use the landscape and then the hereditary trees and build them in. It comes out the same. If you then look at Easter Island in terms of those heads representing the hereditary trees, the chiefs, and the stories associated, and then you get the decorations, that sort of decoration, all the rest, it's all there. Then the whole thing just falls into place and you end up with the avenues and all the other things you need in order to make it a ceremonial place for memory system. And so you just have to be very careful exactly what you're doing and not try and rig anything. So yeah. I've lost track of the question yet again.
That's what this show is about. But you were wanting to go into a bit more detail specifically about Stonehenge.
Yes. Now, with Stonehenge, the beauty of Stonehenge compared to most other places is that the archaeological reports are superb, very detailed, and you've got a long chronology. So what all these monuments around the world are built in the transition from mobile cultures. They're always built by non-literate cultures, and we shouldn't call them that. It's not about what they don't know. It's about what they do use. They're oral cultures. They use a thing called, my technical academic field is orality, O-R-A-L-I-T-Y. It's what you have when you don't have literacy, and boy, does it work well. So at Stonehenge, if you go before, in people's mind are those great big sarsens in the middle, you know, with the triathlons, with my brain stopped working. But, you know, the big sarsens with their little on top and then the circle around it. That's 500 years into the chronology of Stonehenge. So we need to go back. And before Stonehenge itself, there's a thing called the circus, which is a great long landscape thing that's kilometres and kilometres long with what they call, they keep associating everything with death, but I wish they wouldn't. Cairns, passage cairns, so made out of rock that were very secretive. So there's your restricted performance and your extended performance. Anyway, you get to Stonehenge, and the first thing is a circle about 100 metres across, 56 or so on stones. They're marked now as the Aubrey holes with white plaques if you walk around Stonehenge. And they were bought, those are probably, they debate whether it was timber posts, but they're probably the blue stones from Wales. And so you've got a 100-metre diameter circle with 56 to 60 stones around it. There is a perfect memory palace. Around it, you've got a ditch in chalk, which is about 2 metres apart in segments. The ditch is really important, the structure of the ditch, and I had a lot of trouble finding this information. Flat-bottomed, that is exactly what you need in order to perform and cover the ditch, because it's absolutely essential that these ceremonies are performed every year, or exactly what Blake was referring to, you will lose that information. Right. So the original structure of Stonehenge was designed as a memory palace. And then about 500 years into its life, the stones were moved, this is gross oversimplification, but still, the stones were moved into the centre, the Sarsens were built and around it, put around it. And if you look at Foamhenge, when they reconstructed the whole thing, it's actually extremely restricted, and there's acoustic effects, everything.
I got it. Flat bottom curls make the reckoning world go round.
Oh, I don't know if Lynne knows what that's a reference to.
Sorry,
no idea.
It's a Queen song. Sorry.
Oh, right.
It's a very elaborate pun.
Very clever. My granddaughter introduced me to Queen in all my ignorance. Right. So you then get a very secret. Now, I'm now in trouble with this. And if you look at Stonehenge itself alone, you're now in trouble. I've got my restricted site and I've got no public performance site. But at exactly that time, archaeologically speaking, Durrington Walls was built 3K up the road and miles up the road, walking distance, an hour's walk at the most, up the road. And that became and it's a kilometre around with a ditch that gets up to 10 metres deep. Now, have you ever sung in the shower? This is...
Before I got married.
This is cut into stone. Chalk is stone. It's bright, reflects light. And the archaeological research at Avebury, which is another massive, massive henge, shows how much effort they put into getting it flat. Now, can you imagine the performers singing down there with their torches in the white chalk with the acoustic effect of stone? I have begged my husband to dig me a henge ditch, but he keeps refusing. So it would... Yeah, I know. At Durrington Walls, the one associated with Stonehenge, and all the archaeologists see it as a single landscape, as they should. And, well, I do because they do, not the other way around. I take their reports very seriously. About 1 million work hours. People do not put 1 million hours work into something for no reason. And performance sites are absolutely essential. Our Aboriginal people will put months into preparing a performance site because their culture depends on it. So then you've got Avebury, you've got a whole lot of others that have these massive ditches and massive performance sites. Then you start looking at there's the Stonehenge chalk plaques, which match, this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. You've got all the indicators, obviously the astronomical alignments. And then Durrington Walls has all sorts of other public and private performance. They've just found a whole lot of new pits in another big circle there, which just hit the news. And I've been getting excited emails from people saying, it fits, you predicted this, So the whole thing fits.
So the Druids have sort of tried to, there's this whole neo-paganism thing, and they try to converge on Stonehenge at the solstice. I've never been, I haven't really been able to watch any of their ceremonies, but do we know if song is part of that? Absolutely.
And Ros Cleal, who's leading authority on Stonehenge and who's been helping me massively, had me, the Druids are about 1,000 years later, had me extend my theory about this knowledge elite. What happens once farming starts? The knowledge elite no longer have total power because money and wealth, and we all know that wealth and violence is far more powerful than knowledge. Sad, isn't it? Have a look at politics anytime. Anyway, so that knowledge elite become the knowledge elite that serve the leaders, and that's how it ends up as the Druids. And you get that same thing with the griot in Africa. You get exactly the same transition. And she says that everything I predicted with her in the meetings we had fit the archaeology exactly. So you've got
How
things
exciting.
like carved stone balls. These are wood.
So for podcasters, she's holding up what appears to be spherical. They're made of wood, you say?
Yeah, but the real ones in Scotland are made of stone.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so and they've got markings on them. Some of them they're
Markings.
almost. Yeah, this one looks like it's got sort of
Lots of
pyramidical.
Pointy.
Yeah, it's very pointy. They're not like dice. They're quite different. This one almost looks like a spherical pine cone. Yeah.
And they're
Yeah, I thought it was a pine cone at first.
The most elaborate of them is called the Towie ball, and these are associated with the same things as Stonehenge, but up the north they didn't have chalk, which is much easier to carve. So these carved stone balls, there is no explanation that holds water, but I showed one to an Aboriginal elder, photographed the Towie ball, and he just said, "Oh, they've done their chiringa, which is the very secret carved devices of Aboriginal people. They've done them as spheres. How interesting."
Wow.
And then just went on with something else, because no one asks a non-literate, an oral culture, what it might be used for. But my concern, these are all ones that were like this, and most of them were more like that, with just 6 bulbs, are very easy to encode.
It's like a very round die.
Yeah. But the ones with multiple, I was very concerned that if you can't find a sequence on it, there's lots of ways to kill my theory. And one way is if you can't find a sequence on one of these, then it won't work as a memory device. And I studied a whole lot in Scotland, and every last one, the moment you held it and looked for it, you could immediately see a way it was organised to be followed.
So Scottish memory ball secret unlocked.
Yeah. And yes, Cambridge University Press have published an article by me on that. So I'm looking for all these things at all these different locations. There's so much more to it, but that's why the detailed archaeological reports are so important.
So has your theory disproved existing or long-held theories? Have you kind of come in and it hasn't?
No, it doesn't need to, because everything in those existing theories is actually right. What the problem is, they try and say it's for this or for that or for the other. Indigenous cultures do not separate their information into nice, neat little silos. It's all integrated. And the book I have coming out in November with Margot Neal, a leading Aboriginal and the National Museum of Australia, is called Songlines. It's because the songlines integrate all sorts. So the theories about it being astronomical, yes, it is. The theories about it being about death, yes, it is. The theories about it being about animals, plants, everything, because all of that information is encoded into the songs, dances, ceremonies, and performances, and onto the memory devices. So no, I'm not disproving anyone. They're all right. They just haven't put it together and acknowledged the intellectual achievements, because 5,000 years ago, the brain hasn't evolved much since then. And the fact that these methods work so beautifully with our brains, and we've shown with Aboriginal continuous cultures going back, the art culture, we've got one continuous 30,000 years, and we know, because that culture is still active, what the information was, then all you need to do is add that they're integrating and it's intellectual. No, nobody else is wrong. Oh, well, some of them are wrong with wizards and stuff, but I don't need to. The archaeology theories, no, I'm not killing off any of them.
Yeah, just astounding that no one else had come across this and compiled this in the way that you have before, that this was for you.
Self-doubt ruled my life for the first. I kept the two different PhD theses going, because that very question, why would I?
Yeah. Actually, that's, so if you don't mind talking about it, it's a bit off topic, but you come to this as a skeptic, and so you suddenly find yourself fascinated with this idea, but you also have to know that so many, what's the right word? Quack stuff gets associated with ancient, ancient. Yeah. And so, like, how do you approach it when you're skeptical yourself? Like, how do you approach this idea, this theory, when your own innate approach would be, that can't be right.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for the Australian skeptics, I would not have had the confidence to go on. So the first thing I did was use the Australian skeptics and said, starting with the Victorian and then to the whole lot, I have got this theory. I doubt it myself. Can I present it to a meeting? This is what I'm going to argue. Told them what I was going to argue. Let them all research it first. Please ask me the hardest questions, because if I could get rid of that, I could go back to my nice, neat PhD thesis and the book contract I had on offer. And so then I went there and they hammered me, but I convinced them. I did that probably 5 times as the theory built up, and it did 2 national conferences like that. Please pull this down. The skeptics have an incredibly important role in being able to ask the hard questions. If you've got a wacky theory, go to the skeptics and get them to polish it for you. Work to treat. Mind you, that wasn't good enough for me. And my husband decided I was going nuts with the self-doubt, and he said, we can't afford a psychiatrist. We're going to go to England and sit down with the Neolithic archaeologists. So I contacted, it took me ages to send the email, I was so scared, Dr. Ros Cleal, she's curator at Avebury, but she's the lead author on Stonehenge in its landscape, the authoritative reference on it from 1995. And because I came from a university, she had to put up with me. She manages to avoid most nutters. She had a minder there to get rid of me at the end of the hour. And after 4 hours, Damien does a better imitation of her. She was saying, this is doing my head in, because she hadn't thought that way. And she asked me to leave her a book. I left her Howard Morphy's book on art as a system of Aboriginal knowledge. That title's quite wrong, still. And she invited me back the next day. We went through it all the next day. She has publicly endorsed the memory code in the front. And that was when, it was only when she and the other archaeologists present said that I could publicly say this theory is worth pursuing, which of course after 2 days she couldn't say, yeah, you're right. That's what gave me the confidence to go on. So yes, I tested and tested. I came up with all the ways it could be falsified, because if it can't be falsified, it's not worth having. I came up with sites like Great Zimbabwe in Africa that didn't fit. And the reason, they had some of the signs, but not enough of them, but it's slightly down. They had individual wealth. So I managed to find sites that didn't work. And so, yes, I had a lot of ways of testing it.
Excellent.
I still have moments of massive self-doubt.
Well, I imagine,
incredible theory.
Yeah, but it's part of the academic process, I think, or the scientific process, is you put the theory out there, and then you have to deal with the feedback and the arguments against and the arguments for. So so I mean, when did this actually get published?
2015 was your first one.
Gotcha. Okay.
So what happened? Then I approached leading archaeologists with very specific questions on their area. So Ian Davidson here is known as, let's say, very skeptical and hardcore. And I wrote and asked him something, and he wrote back and said, having thing on such and such. Yes, I replied, and it was collaborated by another research by such and such. The moment I did that, he engaged.
Nice.
But each of them want to know I wasn't a nutter and I'd done my work first and was not going to waste their time.
Yes.
I ended up with Bill Light, America, leading archaeologist there on the Pueblo and Chaco Canyon. The most extraordinary site in the world. Nothing has impressed me more, had more emotional impact than Chaco Canyon, C-H-A-C-O Canyon.
I know this.
In Mexico. And yet I went there with archaeologists and it was almost empty, which was bliss for me. But boy, is it incredible. Anyway, it was once I showed that I'd done my research, then the archaeologists would help me.
Now, Chaco was the home of the Anasazi, is that right?
Oh.
Did I say it wrong?
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
The term Anasazi is used, but Anasazi is a Navajo word for our enemies. And the Pueblo do not like their ancient sites being referred to by a derogatory term of another language.
In my defense, much of what I learned about the Anasazi, I learned from the X-Files. So.
Oh, right. And their corn stories, by far the most convincing scientific stuff, was the in terms of a detailed example, it's their stories of the corn, and I won't give you the details, but Richard
Just the kernel.
Ford, yeah. Richard I. Ford is the ethnobotanist, and Alfonso Ortiz, the Pueblo writer, tell you to read each other. So in terms of the Pueblo, you've got the corn mothers and the mythology with the corn mothers and the corn corn maidens, which are all different colours. And they manage to keep all these different colours of corn from cross-pollinating, and so they don't have a monoculture, which means whatever the conditions, they will always survive. Without that, if they had a monoculture of the yellow corn, bad year, boom, they're all dead.
Yeah.
And Alfonso Ortiz gives that mythology. Richard I. Ford shows how the mythology tells them exactly how to plant them at distances in time and space, how the best kernels are selected in ceremony and saved. And so the whole thing works through this mythology by following those rituals. And a ritual is a repeated event, nothing more. By following those rituals, they have survived incredibly harsh conditions until the Spanish arrived. Well, they're still there and active now.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story, and the Pueblo have been fantastic.
As we're all currently experiencing, it turns out that cultural exchange can sometimes mean viral exchange, and you're not prepared. So, yeah.
Yes.
So
on that dark note, so go ahead.
Well, I'll lift things up a bit by mentioning Memory Craft. So that's coming out soon, or it's already available?
In America, it's been out here nearly a year, and that's taking all these methods and how they can be applied in contemporary life. And not only those, but also medieval, because medieval art and that is all mnemonic. And so lots of different techniques. I've got 40 different experiments. If people go to my website, just Google Lynne Kelly spelled correctly and you'll get my website. And I've got 40 different experiments going. So the response was, how would we use this, for example, for foreign languages? And I sort of ignored that email as much as I could until it came. I got the same thing 50 times. So I took on French, which I'd done at school and failed miserably. Took on French, and using the techniques was going hell for leather. So I took on Mandarin as well.
Oh, wow.
And I am, you wouldn't believe how I'm now doing really well. Not only that, I am loving them, because I'm creating these stories. I'm creating songs. I'm wandering big memory trails. I've got characters and all sorts of things happening. And I can learn anything now, despite my really poor memory. My natural memory hasn't improved. I still can't.
No, I know the feeling. You're actually making me wonder. Yeah. It's like, there's so many monsters around the world, and I always have trouble remembering them. And I'm thinking, I've never had any purpose for using a memory palace, even though I was familiar with the technique. But maybe I could use those to memorize world monsters, and that would be really handy.
Yeah, it would, so. Yeah.
It works. And the other beauty for aging, because I'm 68, facing 70 soon, is that the neuroscience shows that our plasticity, I'm working with a neuroscientist at the University of Western Australia, and Jenny Roger is an expert on plasticity. The plasticity, we do not have to lose it. It's a myth, in the rubbish term of the word myth, that we can lay down new neural pathways constantly, and they've got people at 100 years old doing it. The thing is, we stop doing it. And therefore, if you stick in a landscape that you know, and the songs and everything that you know, you will keep reinforcing physically. So each time I lay down a memory, I'm laying it down physically in my brain. And then you reinforce it. So our culture has stopped that reinforcement. Indigenous cultures keep it going and going and going.
No, I think that's really important. I mean, I think everything around, like, my mom is currently going through dementia like early age, well, not early age, early stage dementia. And I can't help but think about my inclination to learn, continue to learn. And all the research says if you keep engaging your mind, it helps at least slow down the process.
Yes,
but they also, I mean, it's not just your mind, your body. I mean, people who lift weights in their 80s and 90s grow muscle. Hooray. But you don't see a weight room in most senior facilities,
and you'll get personal trainers who are all on about your body, and there's absolutely no doubt there's the link.
Yeah.
But don't worry about this training. But if you lay down a memory palace, so I've got the memory palace for the 242 countries and independent protectorates. If you don't do that bit, you don't get Puerto Rico and places like that. So I've got a memory palace for them. Every time I watch the news, I'm adding to those locations. But it's also making me so curious.
Yeah.
The 8th biggest in the world by population is Bangladesh. Why is it bigger than Germany, France, England, all of those by miles? Why is it that Bangladesh hasn't featured so much in taking over, colonizing other places and all this? So you start asking questions because, and that's exactly what Socrates was on about, that if you don't have this big picture, how can you be creative and think new thoughts? And Google takes you down, and I'm not ditching information down, but if you haven't got it in memory to call on, you can't see patterns.
Right.
That's what's happening with, and particularly with Chinese, because I'm now storing all this stuff, I'm starting to see patterns. And that's what the brain naturally does. It's a pattern-seeking device.
Now, if we can't afford a memory palace, can we get like a memory trailer?
Certain parts of the country.
I've got 10 kilometres of I'm now pointing out the door. I have 10 kilometres Castlemaine where I live marked out. So on my morning walks, I do different bits of the memory palace. I've got 1,000 digits of pi, useless thing to do, but had to prove I could do it. I've got 1,000 digits of pi that direction. I've got Chinese that direction, French that direction, the countries. I can't move house. And that's why moving Indigenous cultures off their landscape is so cruel.
Oh, yeah. Like, wow. Yeah. How much of your memory is tied to physical location now?
Exactly. I can't leave here now, but I'm emotionally tied to it as well. Everybody's got a memory palace in their house and outside.
Sure.
Start laying down stuff and start using it all the time and keeping your brains active.
Well, I know we're running out of time, but I can't help but wonder about the Nazca lines.
Yes, they're in memory code.
Are they in your book? Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
Well,
yes, because the Nazca lines are exactly that. And one thing that Nungarai, the Aboriginal colleague, taught me about is how they chant as they walk. And you'll notice the Nazca lines never cross each other, so they can all chant. And but there's the whole, you've got to look at the Nazca lines in terms of the surrounding hills, the culture before and after, and how they were made. It all works beautifully.
Fantastic. Cool. I look forward to reading this. So
and you can see them from the hills nearby. You don't have to go up the balloon.
Exactly. You don't need a balloon or a spaceship, right?
But that's not the purpose. The purpose is
right. Yes. Sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
And Avebury, the avenues in the Neolithic work exactly the same. And Nungarai said to me, as you walk the avenue at Avebury, watch how the stones will come into focus only one pair at a time. And that's why they're as different to each other as possible. They're not all nice and matching. And it's exactly what happens. As you pass one pair, the next pair come into your focus. So they're chanting and getting the memory prompts as they go.
So I just, because we should be ending the show pretty soon, but just to repeat, I mean, you have not only the books that you have on memory techniques, so Knowledge and Power in Prehistoric Societies is a more academic version. You've also got the Memory Code and Memory Craft, and you've got a wonderful book, Skeptics Guide to the Paranormal, which is came out about 10 years ago, I think.
No,
now.
It's a lot longer than that.
Is it? I thought it was,
No, I started my PhD 10 years ago. Probably
Tempest Fugit. Yep.
But that's a fantastic primer for skepticism, and you treat a lot of interesting topics like spontaneous
and a lovely
human
green cover. Yeah.
combustion.
American cover, yes.
And so, yeah, people should definitely go to, I guess, to your website and to Amazon and to check out your books. And
check the show notes. We'll put links in. Yep.
And so you're working on another book now, Songlines, you said? When's that coming out?
Finished now, coming out in November. Songlines, The Power and Promise. And exactly what you're saying, how can it be used? So the power is Margot explaining the power of songlines from an Aboriginal perspective. Promise is me saying we can use it. And she's talking about the third archive. Indigenous cultures archive information through song, dance, and all the methods I've talked about. We archive through writing. The third archive is a combination which is more powerful than either alone. And that's what the book about is memory palaces, songlines, and how we can work. And one of the reviews said that it was an act of intellectual reconciliation. And I'm very pleased with that too.
Congratulations on all of your research and all of your books, and excited to see what you continue to do with this.
Yes, having fun.
Yeah, and I guess we should also just remind everyone who's watching or listening to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Absolutely. Yeah, youtube.com/MonsterTalk. You can subscribe there. And also, please, we desperately need your support on Patreon, patreon.com/MonsterTalk.
That helps us to produce this show and
also to stay in our homes. It's all good.
Yeah. Our memory palaces.
That's right. Exactly. I remember having a home. So good times.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lynne. This is just really interesting. And I mean, we could just talk for hours about this. You know so much. It's really incredible information. And
we'll put all links to your books in the show notes. And again, thank you for joining us. Absolutely.
Send you a file of the images of the devices that we were talking about.
Sounds good.
They're beautiful.
So, okay. Matthew, can you sing us out?
Bye.
Bye.
It's actually quite unlike anything we've ever seen before.
A giant, hairy creature, part ape, part man.
In Loch Ness, a 24-mile-long bottomless lake in the Highlands of Scotland, it's a creature known as the Loch Ness Monster.